Welcome back, PDP people. This is the PDP11 34. I've reinstalled the power supply after doing some work on it, cleaning it up, etc. I've taken the covers off because I want to document some of the difference between this power supply and the one that was in the PDP1104, and just note a few tricks that I learned along the way that so both for my own reference and for potential benefit to anyone who's watching this. So this one had pretty much the same problems as the other one. The 3900 microfarad capacitor that lives down on the other side of the board there was high ESR. It was, so yeah, it had to be replaced. I couldn't find another one of that value, but I found one of this exact size, which was 15,000 microfarads, 7.5 volts, and I put that in instead. And also on this MOS regulator board, like on the other one, these capacitors are too tall. They stick up too far there and interfere on this board, so I've replaced them and strapped them together to reduce flappage. Differences: this power supply, well, that cable there was not removable at this end, the one that goes to the front console. On this one it is, and it's easy to plug. Even though you'd think it would go around that way, it actually goes around this way, and it's got a plug to stop it being inserted in the wrong socket, but in fact it can be stuck in this socket here, and I had that there for a while, and that's actually for the core regulator board, which isn't in this supply, but it would have a little cable that goes to there, and I had this connected to that and it didn't work. So yes, this goes here and around that way. Other things, this little plate that holds the output connectors on the 04 had 4 screws, and you could just unscrew them and that plate was free to come out with this assembly. On this one, there are no screws. In fact, that plate and this here are all one piece of metal. And over here, there's 2 rivets, which had me cursing the designers of this for a while, until I realised that those rivets don't join this to this, they just support a couple of little bosses that, and this piece has slots in it which slide over the boss. So if you remove the screws at the bottom of the supply that hold this on, then this whole assembly can lift up. After you disconnect that and loosen these screws here, you only have to loosen them because then they'll pull out. So yeah, you just take the bottom ones off and this will just slide up. The MOS regulator lives there, and this one had only 1 screw. There should be 2 along there, but it only had 1. 1 screw goes there, and it looks like there's one missing there, but that actually comes from the cover. This screw here goes into there, so don't look for a screw that you've lost, because you've already put it aside with the screws for this. And of course, yes, put everything in bags and label them so that you know where they came from. One of the first things I did was remove this from the back, because these connectors from the power supply to the back plane are hard enough to get at, and this makes it worse. Again, label it. Yeah, so take this off first, put it on last. Which I hadn't noticed, appears to have a missing screw on that transistor. I don't think I did that, but I'll have to find a replacement, I guess. Once you've removed that assembly, you obviously want to clean it up. You should be taking all this stuff out to get all the dust out. To separate this heatsink and board from the lower part, which has the capacitor and inductor, the large electrolytic capacitors, they're joined to this assembly by these lugs. So you need a little Allen key to get in there and loosen them. Make sure that you can push the wires a little bit so that they're obviously free, and then unscrew the 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus the 2 that hold this little capacitor down, because you want to lift the board up, leave this capacitor behind. And note that that screw there has a nylon washer because it's right next to a trace, and the nylon washer stops it shorting out. But once you've loosened those 4 screws and those 2 there, and all these Allen keys, that should lift up and you can get to the capacitors on the bottom. Yeah, and on this one there are 6 of those lugs. On the 04 there was only 2 for the inductor, 2 for the capacitors. On this one there are 4 wires coming from the capacitors, even though the capacitors are connected to each other anyway underneath. I didn't go into all the detail of what I did there because it's substantially the same as on the 1104, just noting those differences, particularly this. That took me a long while to notice. That comes up. It's a bit of a pain because you've still got this piece of metal flapping around with it. With this, it makes it a bit unwieldy because that joins to the board, which joins to the loom, which joins to this. So you're always stuck with having that next to your board, your assembly. Side of the PCB looks pretty good. So yeah, these 2 for the inductor, they go in there. These 2 go here, black, negative, red, positive, and there's a plus sign down there. And it looks like black goes here and red goes here, but there's no plus on that one. This is still a nuisance, all this. I reckon it was better when you could just have that little panel there without all this metal. Lesson learnt from the other one, take careful note of how these are arranged. So plus here, the pins are sitting oriented that way, and they tuck down inside there. Alright, I have to undo all these screws to be able to pull one of the capacitors out, then I can get the other one out. So I've done the reforming thing on these 3 electrolytics. There's the replacement, 15,000 microfarads for 3,900. I hope that's going to be okay. Make sure all these wires going into the lugs are fully into the lugs, and then tighten them up. And then try and put this capacitor in. It's pretty hard because these wires are stiff and not helped at all by all these damn bits of label. It seems that you can actually install the capacitor terminals with the capacitor sitting out there and then force it back in, which means that you can have the small capacitor installed and this fitted. Do make sure that those lugs are fully inserted, the wires are fully inserted into the lugs. Okay. They're done, and once again it's got to be staggered a bit because of the power cable routing around here. So I'll get this back in and that back on, clamp the capacitors, and that should be this assembly completed. So now that's back in, looking good. These 2 capacitors I'm going to replace with these guys, 1000 microfarad, 25 volts. You can see there's damage on that plastic cap from touching something on there. So just getting rid of them, so gets rid of any interference between this and that. And there's the new capacitors strapped together to stop them flapping about. Likewise with these ones. Now I'm going to just test the power supplies under load, full load with this dummy load, but because the fan's not working, I'll only run it for a very short time. So winding up the volts. 240-ish. Right, 4.8 on our 5 volts. It's probably a bit low, but that's a pretty heavy current, of course. Minus 15 is good. Well, the fan's trying to turn. Oh, it's coming good. It's making a lot of racket. It's not spinning too good, but it is spinning. At least I can run my test for a bit longer. Right, so the 5 volts, plus 5 volts B is good. This should be, oh, that's plus 15 rather. This is minus 15. And the fan's woken up completely. Good stuff. So the only concern is perhaps that 4.8 is a bit low on the output, but that's at 24 odd amps, so sort of okay. The fans half come good. And finally we have both power supplies reinstalled in their frames. Still no boards. I'm not that game just yet. I'm going to do that very carefully. But we can at least see that the power on switches do something. Now this is with the jumpers at the back removed. The on signal that gets grounded by that jumper is also operated by the switch here. And in fact, on the console PCB, which behind there, at around about here, I think there's 2 terminals which are ground and that on, so if you short those together it will also turn them on. And the 04 needs the 861B power control because of this funny plug. Let's start applying power. Firstly, just turning on power to this one. The indicator lights come on all the time. Turn on the breaker. That lets power through to the 04 and you can hear the transformer hum, maybe. Turn on the power to this one. Now we've got 2 transformer hums. We turn on DC on this, that should start it up. Both fans are running. See the DC lights come on, and we should get the same for the 34. It's still got the bad fan in there. Ooh, it's a bad fan, isn't it? That's going to have to be replaced. I found one, Element 14 have. It's only about $20. I might get 2 of them because I've got to spend $60 to get free shipping anyway, so I may as well spend that on a fan rather than the shipping. Next thing to do is very gingerly start sticking boards in there. First just the console board and play around with the keys, then maybe memory and then CPU and other stuff. I hope you found this interesting and enjoyable. If you did, of course, please like it and subscribe for more of this frivolity. Catch you later.